Despite stamina being perceived as one of the less important aspects of one's game, we do need to accept the fact that you can't compete without it, at least at a high level. The demands of the game are simply getting higher and higher, and so does the conditioning needed to compete at the highest level. Try playing an elite level game without being fit for it, and you will quickly get left behind chasing other players that are game fit. Unfortunately, the topic of stamina is a really confusing one in the football world. So many players and coaches get trapped into thinking that more is better and end up doing countless jogs and steady state runs that lead them to a dead end. That's the problem behind the grind culture, and that is why I'm creating this video today, because our vision is to help footballers just like you access quality sources of information to make your training smarter. So make sure you stick until the end, because I also have 12 bonus tips for you that you don't want to miss. Without further ado, let's get right into it. The first thing I want to cover has to do with the demands of the modern game. The game has evolved. Players are no longer just walking around. The total distance an elite level player covers on average has drastically increased, and so did the total high-speed distance, as well as the amount of high-intensity actions a player performs during a game. The game is simply becoming more and more intense as it evolves. So the question arises, should you be focusing more on the development of your aerobic or your anaerobic system? Now, football is and will continue to be an aerobic sport, given that a game lasts a minimum of 90 minutes. Although it might be an aerobic sport, the huge amount of anaerobic actions performed during a game make the anaerobic system equally, if not more important. Just because it is described as an aerobic sport doesn't mean that the other energy systems aren't being used. It is just a matter of depletion and timing. The closer you get to the end of a game, the more you start relying on the aerobic system for energy production, for the sole reason that your phosphocreatine and glycogen stores slowly get depleted. Having said all of that, both aerobic and anaerobic conditioning are must-haves when it comes to football performance, and by prioritizing one over the other, you will quickly run against the wall. So if you don't want that to happen, stick until the end and take note of all the information. So guys, in order to develop them, there's a range of different training stimuli you can use based on the purpose of your training. So let's go over each and every one of them, as well as the pros and cons each has to offer. The first one I want to touch upon is jogging, or in other words, steady state cardio at a really low intensity. Jogging, usually for longer distances, can be described as an aerobic activity. Now, if I were to rank each method in terms of specificity, jogging would be ranked last. Although jogging might be a convenient training activity and quite easy to manage, it is simply not providing a strong enough stimulus for healthy players to cause any adaptations either on an aerobic or an anaerobic level. Having said that, it can be a really effective and necessary tool for a player that is in the early stages of rehab and is trying to build his way back to match fitness after an injury, or a player that simply wants to actively recover after an intense game. If you're a healthy individual though, that is training and competing regularly, jogging has to offer little to nothing in terms of conditioning, and I would therefore describe it as a waste of your valuable time and energy. Next up, we have steady state cardio, another aerobic-based activity that is similar to jogging. The difference here lies behind the intensity of your runs. While jogging is executed at a really light pace, steady-state runs can be executed at a faster pace, making them a great tool for players that want to target their aerobic system and increase the total distance they are able to cover during a game. Although not super specific to the changes of game pace, this method is really convenient for most players and the load is easy to manage. I usually don't rely on them with my players all year round, but there are some specific instances throughout the yearly training cycle where I'll be using steady state cardio with them. This is usually the case with players that had minor injuries or with ones that are progressing well with their rehab. These runs can also be used at the early stages of the off or preseason as a way to decrease the intensity of a training block or to build the foundation for more anaerobic based conditioning later on in the season. Then we also have interval training, a training method that is getting increasingly popular over the last 2 decades. You see, players and coaches have started realizing that the game isn't played at a set intensity for 90 minutes and that players are performing a different action every 2 to 4 seconds, with the intensity varying from standing still and walking to sprinting and changing directions with the ball at your feet. For this reason, interval training offers a really convenient solution for players and coaches that want to target specific areas of their conditioning. The great thing about interval training is that the training load and the purpose are manageable, and both systems can be targeted just by tweaking the intensity of your runs, the duration of the whole training unit, the work to rest ratio, the rest time, etc. etc. So to sum it up guys, interval runs are a really effective training method and a really convenient one as well, given that you only need yourself and a timer to execute it. Definitely worth your time and energy, and a training method you can use year round no matter if you're trying to improve your aerobic or your anaerobic conditioning. Now the next method I would like to refer to is the mixed training approach. For all of you that aren't familiar with it, you're basically combining conditioning with another training quality such as technical training, strength or power work, linear or multi-directional speed drills, or even cognitive training to make the activity more specific to the game. This is a method that's definitely a more game-specific stimulus compared to the other ones we mentioned, and convenient as well since it is applicable to both a team and individual setting. But it also comes with its cons, with the primary one being that intensity, as well as the overall training load, can't always be managed precisely, with performance varying from player to player. This would be a method that I would definitely use closer to the last stages of the rehab process, just before the player is about to rejoin team training and games. On top of that, this can also be a great tool to develop more specific stamina for well-trained athletes, or to prime someone for the competitive season during those last phases of the off or preseason. But if you would ask me about in-season, I would generally leave this to the side and only consider it with players that get limited game time and want a more specific task to stimulate their anaerobic system. And now, the queen of conditioning training, the most specific training stimulus, the training method every team in the world uses and should be using: playing the actual game in any way, shape, or form. This includes literally anything, from 11v11 friendlies to small-sided games and 1v1s. Exposing yourself to the actual game is the best form of conditioning you can get, and I don't even need to explain myself here. As specific, effective, and great of a training method this might be, it also has its cons. Number one, the training load is not controllable and dependent on each player's effort, position, etc, etc. And number two, it is not a convenient method, having in mind that multiple players are usually needed for the session. These drills are great for a team setting though, and if you can have access to this type of training year-round, go for it. My tip for you though, if possible, track your performance, set specific training goals and standards, and try to supplement your training with interval runs done on your own. We have partnered up with PlayerMaker, a wearable tracking unit that tracks your technical and physical performance, so if you want to get that job done, consider PlayerMaker, and do not forget to use our discount code FootXFit at checkout to get $40 off the device. Okay guys, now that we went over each method there is currently out there, I want to quickly talk about the principles and some key points that should guide your training process and help you optimize your development. The first principle, which is a fundamental one in all areas of strength and conditioning, is progressive overload. For all of you that don't know, progressive overload basically means progressively increasing the challenge you put on your neuromuscular system. This can be done in a variety of ways, from increasing the reps or sets of the work you perform, to tweaking the work to rest ratio and the intensity of your runs. If you're constantly stimulating your system the same way, it will plateau. That's just how it works. Instead, aim for slight tweaks here and there that can lead to major improvements over time. But most importantly, don't do too much too soon and go one step at a time. You can't become an elite level athlete overnight. That's just how it is. The next thing I want to touch upon is periodization. Just like your body reaches a plateau by getting fed with the same training load over and over again, the same happens if your focus and the training stimuli you're using remain the same all year round. Instead of relying on one training method and becoming one-dimensional, try to change your approach and structure your training around specific goals based on the time of the season you're in, how much game exposure you're getting, the level you play, and the standards you want to reach. On one training block, your focus might need to shift more towards aerobic conditioning methods and principles, while on some other blocks, you might want to target your anaerobic system more to prime for an important event or game. The main takeaway here is that you need to adjust to your needs and avoid being monotonous with your training. This requires you to know the why behind your training tasks in order to avoid the guesswork and target the things you want to target. Now, to end this video off, I gathered up 12 tips you can use if you want to take this up a notch and really gain the most out of the time and energy you invest in your development as a player. Take a screenshot of this and ask me anything you want in the comments below. And of course, if you want to leave all the guesswork to the side and start seeing actual progress in your game, not just your conditioning, then consider working with us. We are working with players just like you on a daily basis, and the progress we're seeing with them is really great. If you want to join, either hit the link below or DM us Level Up on Instagram, and we will get back to you with more details. Until the next time guys, have a good one.